Hi, everybody, and welcome to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know The Last of Us Season 2 finale. My name is Mike Bloom, and if there were two words to describe the hour that we just witnessed, it would be whale and wheel, because it was massive and it spun us around. Grace Leader, how you doing?
I'm doing well. You can't play baseball in that stadium anymore. How are you gonna play baseball? You
Yeah,
can't play baseball in there.
yeah, I mean, maybe it's just Gale style where like you really are not banking on any sort of power hitting from
True.
these kids that you're like,
It's
we
true.
can move everything in, okay? This kid's going nowhere outside of the infield.
Yeah. The finale is here. Like we
I
watched it.
I
Yeah.
know, believe it or not, it was a shorter season. It was 7 episodes. It's definitely been, we will reserve, I think, our opinions about the season overall towards the end of the podcast. But I would say, you know, by comparison, more of an up and down season, as it were, compared to season one. And I came in, as I've espoused over the past couple of weeks, Grace, with this idea of because we know that there will at least be a season three, and I believe Druckmann and Mason have now gone on record saying that they actually wanted to envision it as a four-season story, that this would not necessarily be a huge definitive finale. When I think of finales, Grace, I think of the two C's. I think of cliffhangers,
Mm,
and I think about conflict. I think about this idea of closure as well, if we want to
closure.
include a
Yeah.
third C in there, of resolving some currently existing storylines while also teasing, oh my god, you're going to want to tune in next season because you don't know what's going to happen next. And I feel like, definitely there were some cliffhangers that existed, namely a couple big ones of, is X character alive, which we'll certainly get into. Closure, I mean, maybe in the form of certain people's lives finding closure. So again, maybe I'll validate my statement from earlier that while there was significant things that happened and events in this episode, it did still, especially with that last moment, Grace, still feel to me like a bit of a softer conclusion to a season than maybe a typical season finale would be.
Yes, I agree. I think that they did their best to, I think, sort of amp up the end of this season. And yet it definitely does feel like there's a lot more to go. And I think you can sort of feel this being, Tara and I will talk a lot more about this, but this is, essentially, you know, in the middle of the video game. And so I think in terms of like, it doesn't feel like we maybe saw a full story, you know, the beginning, middle, and end to this season. It feels like we're still in the middle of that. I think, yeah, we could talk more about at the end about the season. I think each individual episode is like at least good.
Hmm.
I think it's tough. I think a lot of people had the same sort of feeling after episode 2, and we went into episode 3 of like, wow, how are they gonna come back from Joel's death? What are and it
Yep.
was a little bit of a wind down. I feel like last week for me that was the best episode of the season, so it's going to
Hmm.
to build on that is a tremendous ask. And I don't know that it was like 100% successful, but I'm hoping that this is an episode that the more we talk through it, the more I will have some appreciation for what they did. I definitely felt the end of the episode, I was like, okay, all right, yeah, I wait a bunch of more time before the next season comes out. I don't think it was bad. I just don't think it was like electric. And last season's finale was electric in my opinion. So, you know,
Well, true, yeah, true Scar style. Maybe we're going a bit more off the grid, the electrical grid, as it were. I mean, I gotta start with where things finish. I know that obviously we're going to build to this point, but look, the entire MO of Ellie and crew being in Seattle is, where's Abby? We
yeah,
gotta find Abby. Gotta get my revenge on Abby. We finally got freaking Abby, and as the last scene indicates, it seems like we're going to be getting at least a little bit more Abby to start off the season. It's very comparable to the final scene of episode 5, where we have, this big death scene in the present, and then it ends on this more quaint flashback scene to take us behind a character's perspective. But even rewinding that back a bit, Grace, I guess we have to really start in breaking down this episode with the major conclusion that leads to the initial cut to black. Is Ellie dead? Did Abby kill Ellie?
yeah.
Were her final words to her like, you wasted your second chance at life, so I gave it to you. I could end it at any time.
Yep, fully dead. Yep, must have died. Fade to that's how you know. Fade to black, gone.
Famous video shows have indicated that as well with sudden cuts to black.
It's a little bit of like it's as a video game player, it's a bit of an annoying ending because like, you know, I feel like if I hadn't played the video game, I'd be coming on here and being like, well, we know Ellie's not dead, right? Like she's not dead. And yet because I know that she's like spoiler, she's not dead, then I'm like, should I say she's not dead? I guess I should maybe pretend like I really don't know. No, she's not. I mean, they killed Joel this season. I mean, I guess that some are going to say like maybe Ellie dies as well. But you have to at least one. I feel like Ellie's plot armor got stronger when Joel died, not that it got that it weakened. So they tried. They create a cliffhanger for us at the end of the season with Abby shooting a gun towards Ellie.
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, as someone who again is not very attuned to what the rest of the video game is, even just coming in from the TV perspective, I think Ellie is alive. Yes, she has no immunity to bullets, but I think in this case, Abby, again, the last thing she is going to say before she shoots the gun is, I let you live and you wasted it. I think the key piece of information that is missing that we are going to find out more about in the beginning of season 3 is, why has Abby been missing for the better part of 3 days? And I'm sure it might have something to do with like her either alignment or not so much with everything going on with the WLF. We see that apparently there's going to be this massive siege or battle that's going to be happening that night, and maybe Abby didn't want to be a part of that, so she's MIA. And so I could very much see a continuation of this last scene at Grace, where it's like, I let you live and you wasted it. Bang! Ellie opens her eyes. It's a bullet in the wall above her, but I'm giving you another chance. Help me do this thing, whatever it might be, whether it's undermining Isaac, whether it's, taking out the scars in her own way. And so I think that season 3, after having this duality set up really from the beginning of the season, and while largely in absentia has been teased throughout, now the two sides of the same coin are finally coming together for season 3. And I thought it was a really interesting way to end the season. Granted, it was not the end of the season, as I'm sure we'll get into in what is teased in the very last moment, but to also see this larger continuation of the narrative of war and perpetuating a cycle of violence. Now, this is something that we've talked about from a generational perspective, was talked about a lot in the last episode with Joel's father and Joel's words to Ellie on the porch. But I mean, when you look at the war between the WLF and the Seraphites, and the war between the Abby side and the Ellie side, again, they're not too terribly dissimilar, with this idea of just, despite, Ellie wanting to adamantly go after Abby, she keeps picking off her people. And so Abby is going to continue to get revenge by picking off Ellie's people. And it just keeps going and going.
Yeah, I mean the continuation of violence, this like repeated cycle that, this idea that like to some degree Abby feels like, and all of Abby's like sort of counterpoints, like her underlings sort of say the same thing every time they encounter Ellie, like, hey, we let you live, like it could have been a lot worse. We actually like didn't we were trying not to continue the cycle of violence, like by killing Joel, that was supposed to be the end of it. And yet Ellie has chosen not to. I kept talking earlier in the season about this idea that like it's like this, Joel passes trauma on to Abby, and then Abby passes trauma on to Ellie. It's like
It's
this
the
thing
world's worst game of hot potato.
yeah, that's right. And so it continues and continues, and through the relentless pursuit of it, you end up other people end up as victims here, in terms of, as we saw with Nora a few episodes ago, and then I believe it's Mel and Owen who meet their fate in this episode, and then unfortunately by the end of the episode Jesse is gone as well. And yeah, I mean, you and I were talking a little before we started that like Druckmann, when he created this game, like there are things that he's pulling on from real life experiences about like how do you end cycles of violence, how do you do it, and every individual act of violence that gets perpetrated feels like it's warranted, and at some point somebody has to decide to stop, to not get revenge on the things that have been happening for years. And that's, as you can like see from both Ellie and Abby's like journeys, it's really hard to do, Mike.
Well, yeah, especially because there is something inherently tied to the death of those people, right?
Mhm.
This is not just a situation where it's like, oh, X amount of soldiers got taken out. Oh, that sucks. Well, I guess we better keep striking. There is obvious inherent emotional ties. Now, granted, we have experienced this much more from the Ellie side than the Abby side. Maybe season 3 we'll get to explore a bit as to like what were Abby's stakes in Nora, in Owen, in Mel that made her feel a certain way to go after Ellie's people once again. But Ellie will express this to Jesse, right? About the reason why she is so adamantly in pursuit of this person is because, as much as he is talking about wanting to serve the community, from Ellie's perspective, Jackson was not her community. You know, it was a
Right.
nice place to live that provided a necessary sense of normalcy for her. But as she talked about, my community was beaten to death in front of me while I was forced to effing watch. That was something that fundamentally broke her world. And so, from her perspective, getting revenge is a very, like morphed version of trying to right her world and right her community. But it's something that she is adamantly pursuing because of that. And lo and behold, she loses yet another member of her community in the form of Jesse, who one of the last things he'll tell her essentially is like, yeah, despite the fact that, you feel like I'm not on your side, if the world was on fire, you would throw yourself into the flames to save me.
Yeah, it's pretty tough as he like, yeah, he like espouses this, and then they run through the door and he is shot. It's really brutal.
Yeah.
But it, yeah, this yeah, I just this I think that, so fans have been, I think, a little we've talked to like ad nauseum about it, and I don't need to like belabor the point a ton more, but there
Mm.
is this idea that like Ellie's grief has not been present enough, I think, like, and specifically grief in the form of like anger. And there's a comment in the Discord this week about where somebody like, who I don't think is very like, has been like looped in on the Discourse, was like, yeah, I don't think like Ellie, like the way she's been acting works for her so far. And then so the point where when she kills Nora, it felt kind of like a shock. And I think that there was this comment, and I'm forgetting, I think it was from I can't remember who it was from, so I don't want to say it's wrong. But the this idea that actually the version of Ellie that we've been seeing is actually sort of like the masked version. This like
Mm.
jolly version, this like more happy-go-lucky, like let's go to Seattle for a romp type,
For a
vibe that
nice
she's been
3-day
giving.
tryst, a long weekend.
Yeah, like they're joking when they like are up on the bridge and they're like seeing, and they're like, let's kill them. They're basically joking about killing them all. And then we cut to like, you see the military force, like this will not be as easy as it's been. But this idea that Ellie, this is a part of Ellie that she has had to hide for like
Mm.
this, like the angry version, the like the frustrated version, the one who wants to, you know, get revenge, and lash out. This is a version that we saw from last season where like I keep going back to the scene where Joel has like a gas station hideout for supplies, and Ellie goes into the basement and she like kills this infected who's like
Right.
stuck in the wall, and she sort of like gets like some glee out of like inflicting violence on this thing, that like this is an impulse that Ellie has had to actually kind of like figure out how to control. And so this
Yeah.
idea that
It's an
this has been
infection
an
in a
act,
manner of speaking.
yeah, and I feel like we're finally sort of starting to get there, and Ellie does it with Nora. By the time we get to maybe Mel and Owen, and we'll talk about this whole scene because I don't think I think it's like perfect, but I
Mm.
think I get what they're trying to go for, which that like, in that moment, although it's kind of an accident, she still is holding them up at gunpoint to get information about trying to get Abby, and the whole situation ends up being like she shoots a gun and she kills these two people. Um, and I think Jesse can see that in her, in terms of like you'd burn the whole world down. So yeah, and so tragic that then immediately he meets his fate.
Yeah, well,
So,
let's talk about the end of Jesse here because certainly it shocked me, though I think in retrospect, when you look at it as essentially us finally kind of getting to know Jesse as a character, then it makes a lot of sense. It's like, well, we're getting a lot from him. We got his entire exposition about like I was gonna run away to Mexico at a certain
Yeah.
point, but I stayed behind because of the importance I have to play and the stability of everything going on with the main character. So if I was wiped off the map, wouldn't that be inconvenient? I was so happy to have young Mazzino get cast in this season. I loved him in Beef. Obviously, a very different character than the one he personified there.
Yep.
So, what did you make of sort of this extended swan song for Jesse? I mean, there's a lot that's left with him, including the fact that he knew about Dina being pregnant, that he talked about the importance that he played in the community. He sort of serves as this kind of like metaphoric representation from Ellie's perspective as to like everything that's stopping her from pursuing her revenge.
Yeah. So, and on one hand, so in season 1, when something was really noticeable at the show is that from a meta perspective, like Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey were like the only main cast.
Yeah.
And in season 2, they did switch that up where they elevated a bunch of people to be in the main cast alongside the two main actors. And that makes some sense when you think that like, okay, we're going to lose Pedro Pascal on this show as he'll be, I guess he's almost still in half the season, but to some degree, like it'd be kind of silly to be like this show stars Bella Ramsey and have nobody else. So they elevate everybody else. But I still think it's so important to think of this show and these stories as about Joel and Ellie. Certainly then like I feel like into season 2 you also start to, which we haven't really seen yet, but also Abby as well. And so in some degree I'm like, I feel like we didn't get enough Jesse, like young Mazzino as Jesse in this season. Like it feels like one of the things that I think is it can be hard about this story is that there's all these people that we're gonna like we've lost four people,
Mm-hmm.
five if you count, it sounds silly to say like count Joel, but once Joel dies, once we're in like this version of the story, we've lost Nora, Mel, Owen, and Jesse, right? That's every,
Yep.
yeah. And all of those people to some degree, like they don't feel quite as
And
important.
also we should say, not to obfuscate the Dina of it all, maybe Dina. We do not see
Maybe Dina.
Dina in that last scene with Abby.
Correct.
And she's not exactly completely mobile to
Yes.
escape from Abby either.
Yes. And so part of me feels like to some degree, like all of those characters feel a little underbaked, like a little like like to some degree is Jesse's death more impactful if we have more time with Jesse. But I almost think that like part of that is the point, not just from again that this is like an Ellie like we shift from it being Ellie and Joel to then in my opinion Ellie and Abby, which I know probably doesn't feel like that from the season, but if you think about it that way, like part of the point is that like they are supporting characters, they are with it, and part of the point is just I think there's supposed to be some of like in my head it's like I would have loved to see more Jesse, but that's also part of the point of like what a tragedy that he dies, what a tragedy that like there's so much more to that. And then in the pursuit of revenge, he ends up dying and Mel ends up dying and Mel and Owen end up dying. And so I think that that's sort of part of what Druckmann was trying to do in the video game and what they adapt into the show as well, where yes, these people come into your life and there are important moments and things that they say and you take from them, but to some degree, how sad that like they die.
Yeah, and we've talked so much about the link between love and violence, particularly when it came to Joel's big move,
Mm-hmm.
#Survivor at the end
Mm-hmm.
of season 1. And we sort of see a version of that here where Jesse throughout this episode is preaching sort of his own form of altruism, right? His own form of selflessness. The fact that, hey, I voted no because it was not the best thing for the community. And he basically, again, is sort of serving as this voice that Ellie, I imagine, is partially telling herself, but kind of needs to hear in that moment of like, everything you do for you, a la Bryan Adams. Like, you are not necessarily doing this to help anybody else from any particular point in time. I know that you made that big grandstanding pitch of like, we've got to protect ourselves because you don't know who's coming next. No, the reason you did this is because you lost Joel. Let's not get anything twisted. And so I think he really serves as that sort of like big brassy reminder as to why she is doing what she is doing. But it also goes to show, like, when you love somebody, yes, from the Joel perspective, you can do absolutely objectively terrible things in pursuit of someone that you love. But there's also this idea that, as we saw with Joel and Sarah and Tess, when you love somebody, you open yourself up to the possibility that those you love can die just due to being in proximity of you, right? Like, even look at Joel and Sarah, like, they were shooting at Joel. Joel was holding Sarah. Sarah takes the bullet. Tess ends up getting infected because she was with Joel trying to help get Ellie out of Boston. There's this idea of sort of, you know, like casualties. This idea of what am I trying to say? Sort of like people taking on damage that was not necessarily meant for them. Not to say that Abby wasn't intent to kill Jesse when the opposition ends up storming through those doors, but at the same time, due to Jesse being so ride or die for Ellie, because he rode into town, he died for it.
And I actually think what's really important in this story is maybe not as much like, yes, like Jesse is, you know, ride or die for Ellie, but I actually think it's really important how ride or die for Dina he is, because he's going to show up and he's going to take care of Dina and realize, because of the way she's acting, that she's pregnant, and Ellie's going to you know, basically reveal, like, sort of like,
which was a bad moment. Like, I know there's been a lot of ticky tack about, like, would Ellie actually do this? She's smarter than this. This might have been the one time where I was like, come on. Like, I know you are not necessarily the most social butterfly, but I think even you would pick up on some cues of, like, Jesse fishing for information out of you.
yeah, I mean, I feel like he seeds enough to like, he's just kind of looking for confirmation on what he thinks is true, and he does it in a way that I think, like, I didn't really have a problem with Ellie sort of reveal, because I feel like Jesse plays in, like, he's like, yeah, she wouldn't drink, and like, he basically knows, like, I don't really feel like Ellie, you know, I guess she 100% confirms it, but nevertheless, he talks about that he loves Dina. He just knows that it's, you know, it's not the same type of love that obviously Ellie has for Dina, and that he realizes sort of his place in this situation. He can sort of see the relationship that Ellie and Dina have, and yet he's so close to Ellie. And actually, I think this is a really, probably maybe the most important point, is as much as it's love for Dina, it's also this like theme of fatherhood that and parenthood that has is really strong. And I think they've actually tried to like extra emphasize it in the show.
And this idea of protection too, right? Jesse's like, Dina says that she can't die. I can't die either because I have to be there for this kid and I have to be here for Jackson.
And that's been like, you know, that's such a prevalent theme in the games, but I feel like in the show, they like, you know, they gave Tommy a kid. The first thing Ellie says when she, or no, maybe not the first thing, but one of the things she says when she finds out Dina's pregnant, like, I'm going to be a dad. Like the theme of fatherhood, and I think specifically fatherhood, but parenthood in general is so prevalent in this season that this is why Jesse dies, is because he's come there, and it's also like, once he knows that she's pregnant, there's this extra level of like thing that he has to like kick into gear to protect, you know, Dina, but then also his child, and it ends up costing him his life. So yeah, it's super, I think he's super important to like hit that home as well. Like, we'll also get like when she kills like, we'll talk about the scene where she kills Mel, because we're obviously playing super into, it's not just that it's like, oh, how sad, like, that is true, it is just awfully sad to have killed somebody who was pregnant, but they play into this idea of like protection for children and the protection of young, you know, you can see that when Mel dies. So yeah.
Well, Jesse, one of the things that he says in the beginning of the episode is that, you know, the reason why he ends up not gallivanting off to Mexico with this random painting selling woman is because he was taught to put other people first. And while we don't get a lot of Dina in this episode, she is by and large sidelined because of her injury. I do want to talk about one particular moment that I think, again, assuming that both Dina and Ellie are alive in season 3, I think is going to be a major point of division in what has been like a pretty solid unified relationship so far, which is when Ellie comes back from the Nora of it all. She is going to treat her wounds, and Ellie is going to come clean to her about, as she is getting cleaned, I suppose, about everything that went down in Salt Lake City. Now, what I do find interesting, and what I can't remember, Grace, from a couple weeks ago, is that
Mhm.
Ellie will say that she did not kill Nora, that, almost haunted. She sits there saying, like, that she thought it would be harder to do to essentially beat the information out of her, but it wasn't. It was easy. She just kept hurting her. But when Ellie opens up about this information, Dina, who is usually quite, gregarious and smiley towards Ellie for obvious reasons, kind of mutely puts down the sponge, backs away, and says, "We've got to go home." And I wonder, Grace, if despite how, again, ride or die Dina was, the only point of support for Ellie throughout this entire Seattle venture, if this is a piece of information to give her a lot of pause as to, she had espoused a few episodes ago this idea of, like, if they killed Joel for a reason, it wasn't a good one. He didn't deserve it. Now, maybe finding out the truth, could that be a little bit of a false statement for Dina?
Yeah, I think another thing that's sort of important to talk about, and again, I feel like it's like really tied up with the way that people are like reacting to Ellie as a character in the television show, is also this idea that like just there are many reasons to say that like Ellie and Joel, I don't want to necessarily say they're like bad people, but they are not like altruistic,
Yeah.
perfect people. They are Joel. I mean, I sort of was like, we talked about this last week when we do the flashback. I was thinking like, oh, it's gonna be this thing. We're gonna learn that like Joel basically like, Eugene asked Joel for help because he can't face, having Gail be so sad that he died, blah 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 blah, and it will show how good of a person Joel is. And actually, the episode's like, actually, Joel's kind of an a-hole. And I was like, oh man, that sucks. But like, yeah, it's okay. It's like that's what the show I think wants you to sort of confront is like
Agreed.
people you love who make bad decisions and think that they're doing it for good reasons, but it's still, a bad thing that they choose to do. And in Joel's case, it's a lie. And I think Dina is seeing this thing, this like impulse in Ellie, which is like a tendency for violence
Mm-hmm.
based on trauma and her and history and all of these things that are happening, that like Dina starts to see that like, oh, this actually isn't fun. Like there was a world where we would go and we would get revenge on Abby, but we would like go in, we'd kill Abby, and then we'd leave and go home. And like that's it. And like actually, there's this the I think it's also important to note like the way in which like Abby's crew keeps being like, "Hey, come on. Like we let you live. Like we didn't." And I know Ellie kills them by accident, but also she is willing to hold them up at gunpoint.
Yep.
And she does like
And to be fair, like, maybe the reason why she tends to go easier on Mel and Owen to start is because of the immense amount of guilt she feels about everything with Nora. Like, we
yeah.
talked about this whole metaphor, right? About how, like, revenge, you think you're filling up the hole in your heart with grief, but if anything, you're either digging it deeper or just filling it up temporarily. As you see Ellie's reaction when she comes back from Nora dying, like, she's not grinning from ear to ear, being like, "Wahaha, another one bites the dust." She definitely does not feel like this is sating any part of the bloodlust revenge fantasy he has due to what this crew did to Joel.
Yeah, and I've talked a lot about the ways in which like Joel and Ellie obviously would butt heads because Ellie but because of like this like aversion to authority and being told what to
Mm.
do and wanting to have autonomy, and yet actually like that's actually where Joel is. Like Joel is, when we first meet him, he's a smuggler, like right, like he has an aversion to authority too. And so this idea that like, yeah, they like it's this sort of adopted chosen family, but at the same time like they're very similar. It's why they bond. They're so bonded, why they get along so well is because they're very similar. And so this way in which like I don't think that either Joel, and I do think this is like slightly different than the video game, which that I think Ellie, because you kill people all the time in the video game, like I think it makes more sense to have this person who's sort of like, yeah, I'm gonna do all these, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna kill. Whereas I feel like it is a little more realistic to think that like it's more nuanced, I think, in the show. This idea that Ellie doesn't necessarily want to kill people, but she definitely has the capacity to do it. And that to me
Yeah.
feels very Joel, of like Joel doesn't want to kill people. He doesn't want to kill Eugene, but he has the capacity to do it. And so Ellie, I think, has the same thing about her, that in this moment when she's telling Dina, like, this is what happened, and she doesn't tell her she killed her, but she said it was like easy to torture her, which in some
Yeah.
ways is like, that's brutal, that's evil. And I feel like Dina can recognize that there is a level of trauma here, and there's a level of this isn't good anymore. And add to the fact that Dina's been shot with an arrow in the leg, and she's pregnant, and all of this stuff. Like, she didn't learn that she was pregnant until she got there, right? So
Yeah.
I think this
Which
idea
was,
of like,
like 2 days ago in real
yeah,
time.
yeah, this idea of like, we should go, like, it's like, when you're like dating someone new, and like they do something, and you're like, oh, that's kind of fun. And then like you're like, oh, now that we're like actually like maybe it's serious, like that part actually isn't that fun.
Yeah, it's like the end of The Graduate, right? Like
Yeah.
they all ran off after the wedding, and now they're actually sitting in the bus just staring forward, being like, oh,
Well, yeah.
well, this was a decision I made.
Yeah, I would not like to die, and I would not like to see the level to which Ellie is maybe willing to go in the pursuit of revenge for Joel is a very dark place that Dina does not maybe feel comfortable going. Yeah.
Well, let's go into the various skirmishes that happen in Seattle, and that will, hopefully bring us over, much like a wayward motorboat, to the blood that Ellie really lets spill in this episode. But we finally get a reappearance of Isaac here. Again, we get a bit of a tease that something's going down tonight, that there is this storm that is rushing in, both literally in the case of the weather, as
Yeah.
well as metaphorically, that there has been enough going on between the Scars and the Wolves that tonight the Wolves are going to do something that, as Isaac posits to, I think her name was like Elise, the woman who had to lock her poor son in the hospital because he was infected.
Yeah.
Essentially says like, yeah, there's a very good chance I will not live to see tomorrow. I will say, out of the finale, this is probably the stuff that worked for me the least, just because, to be frank, I love Jeffrey Wright. I do not care about any of this whatsoever. And I would say my least favorite scene is, and something that I think could have probably been eliminated, though maybe there's canonical reasons, Grace, that you can give to me, was the whole Ellie is following all of their boats, believing that it would lead to Abby, takes the motorboat, perfect storm, capsizes, she gets like strung up by the Seraphites for all of 10 seconds, gets saved by the bell in the form of the war happening, and then she ends up calling a mulligan and being able to actually take the motorboat over. It kind of just felt like an odd, unnecessary detour to me.
Yeah, this is tough because I feel like, in some ways I want to really appreciate the restraint they've had, that like you have Jeffrey Wright on your show.
Much like the restraint around Ellie's neck during that climactic moment.
I don't appreciate that, but I appreciate that. I just think that like the show for the most part has tried to be very faithful to, at the very least, the like moments and the things that like as things happen. In season 1, where like I feel like we would go like deeper into something rather than like diverting from something, like so like Bill and Frank is like going deeper into a story that was like, it was there if you kind of like, there's a little bit of like, we move some things around to make that story really work, but for the most part it's not that much different than like what you get in the video game, except like you just get to see a lot more of it. Whereas I feel like in this season, like I kind of assumed that we would get, even I feel like last week with Joe Pence, with Eugene, like it felt like I thought we were going to get like a ton more. Like I thought we would get like, they literally, like Eugene and Gail are never like in the same scene, and so I just thought we would,
much to Gail's chagrin. That was the entire problem with Joel.
I know. Is that her last name?
Give me just screen time with Joe Pantoliano, please. Yeah. It's all I wanted when I signed up.
Yeah, thank you for pronouncing the name that I get nervous about pronouncing every time. Joe Pantoliano. That it? Whatever, close enough. All that to say, I feel like the stuff here with like the Seraphites and the WLF, it will become much more important, just like not spoiling anything, but it will become much more important once we're like flashing back and then going through the sequence of events here. In some ways, I'm like, I appreciate the notion to be like, accurate to what happened and like not try to add too much more. And in some ways I'm like, man, you got Jeffrey Wright on your show and you like really could have probably done a ton more with him than you did. But
Well, that was what makes me, again, when I go back to this adage of like, this kind of feels like a mid-season finale,
yeah,
then this would sort of
100%.
be like second half of season 2/season 3 material, right? Is that I imagine, again, if my assumption is correct, that we are going to be really Abby focused for at least the first episode, if not multiple episodes in season 3, then I think this is when we're finally going to care about the WLF. I think we're going to find out a lot more about Isaac, about what's going down with the skirmishes with the Seraphites. I think especially we're going to find out a lot more about Abby's crew, because we got drips and drabs in episode 2, right? Where it's like, okay, Mel is the one that is the least wants to be there out of everybody. Owen is sort of like the guy trying to calm everybody down. Manny's a freaky ass son of a bitch who spits on Joel's corpse. Like, but that has sort of become largely obfuscated because they've largely just been missing. And so
Yeah.
we even see it pop up a little bit here where, Ellie's going to overhear Owen and Mel seemingly arguing about like them possibly going behind enemy lines to try to find Abby. They tell Ellie that they don't know where she is. Again, we're not sure how entirely true that is, but it also goes to show that like, as much as they might be presented, albeit briefly, as nuanced, Owen is going to die and Mel by proxy, because he does try to grab a gun and essentially shoot Ellie because of the fact that she's holding her at gunpoint. He's not doing the whole what was pulled up, what Joel did before at the end of season 1, right? With the whole, all right, I'm going to put you two in separate rooms and you point at where Abby is on the map and it better be the same location or you're going to pay.
So yeah, they don't say that, but that is what happens in the video game. She's like, yeah, you're both gonna. She does this trick of like,
well, yeah, and Joel did that at the end of season 1 too, if you remember, when he was trying to find her when she got kidnapped.
Right. So that's the exact same thing that they must have used it like, on the heading on their road
like,
trip across
during
America.
the 5 years. It's like, Joel, how did you find me? Well, that's a funny story.
Yeah. But yes, he did. I mean, I think like, yeah, I mean, again, the show is like nobody's perfect here. Like Ellie holds him at gunpoint, and then yes, also Owen tries to like grab a gun and do it. I think in terms of like, your assumptions about where we're going, like it's no coincidence that like the last thing we see is like Seattle day 1. Like we're there was a very clear like time mechanism that they used throughout season 2 that you can make some assumptions about how that comes into play into season 2 up until the point where like Abby and Ellie come face to face again.
Yeah, so let's talk about this double kill that Ellie is able to pull off. I mean, the look from Bella Ramsey's face indicates that despite how brutalistic she took things out on Nora, this is a completely different kettle of fish. That this seemed almost more reflexive, instinctual. It was more so a like, she fires the gun in response to Owen firing his gun. She clearly did not intend the gravity of her actions, especially once the revelation occurs that Mel is pregnant. And maybe that will again play into a bit more as to like why she's been trepidatious towards a lot of these things, that, she obviously has someone else that she is caring about. But let's talk about, the tragedy that I think happens here, where Grace, this scene was incredibly dark. I thought it'd go in a completely different dark direction when Mel is like, hey, grab a knife and cut the baby out of me. I was like, oh my God, are we doing this? Are we, like, I put myself in Ellie's shoes and then some with the immense amount of anxiety I was feeling just towards the gore that would be present. But Ellie doesn't allow it to happen. And whether it was due to the fact that she felt like the cause was long gone, rather the fact that she is like kind of already shocked into a state of trauma upon the gravity of her actions, or whether it was a little piece of that Nora scene leaking in with her being like, all right, this is terrible, and I never intended you to do this, especially to kill a pregnant woman. But at the same time, you were part of the crew that took away my community.
Yeah, I mean, so I think so. First of all, this is quite different than the video game, and Taran and I will talk a lot about it. I'll just say, I think fans are going to be real mad about how specifically Mel dies, and because there is Ellie kills both Owen and Mel in a far, like, it's not completely intentional, but it's far far more like assertive than this moment is, where I mean, I guess I'll just say it. So Ellie has both of them held up at gun. Same thing, has them both held up at gunpoint. Says you're gonna show me on the map separately. You're gonna tell me where Abby is. Owen rushes for the gun, and in like a competition, she shoots Owen in the stomach. Then she fights with Mel over a knife and ends up stabbing Mel in the neck. And then like Owen sputters out like, oh, she's pregnant basically. And then she goes over and unzips the thing and we see that she's pregnant. And that's it. There's no like, help me have the baby moment. So I think, first of all, fans are gonna be real mad that like, it's not, I think people are gonna be real mad that it's like the accidental threw a body into the grazing of a neck that's like enough to like slowly kill her. And I will agree with what he was like, this is kind of silly. On the other hand, I really, really think the moment of like, help me deliver the baby is like, there is like a lot here that I think thematically like really, really works. And so I get that they were trying to figure out a way to like set up this moment where you basically, so again, the theme of parenthood. And so this is a moment where Mel has thought a lot about the way in which she might have to have the baby in a situation that is not how you would have a baby in, 2025 right now. Like you can't go to the hospital. There's no hospitals. You just have to have the baby. And the fact that she might have to.
Oh, this would be an amazing crossover episode with the Pit, though. I mean, we literally have a Dr. Mel here.
Yeah, they were in Pittsburgh last season. No, they weren't in Pittsburgh. They were in Kansas City.
Yeah.
So like how much Mel has thought about, I need to be ready to protect my baby and figure out how to have my baby is like so important. I think it's so important. And then this decision that Ellie gets put into in terms of like whether she's going to try to do it or not is super important. And I think again, this idea that like Ellie is not a perfect person and sometimes will make what I think is like kind of a bad decision, whether or not I think that probably Ellie should have tried to do it, but for many reasons she decides not to do this. And I think like there's many reasons. One, it's like, what are you gonna do when you have Mel's baby? Like you're gonna come back to Dina and be like, so like where did you get a baby from? Like, and so she decides, and like it also would severely impact her ability to go get revenge on Abby. They will have to take care of a baby now. So like there are a ton of reasons that I think like Ellie decides no, and I think those reasons are selfish and bad. And so I think you can like
and also a little bit of like Ellie might be like, I'm a little out of my depth if I'm told to essentially perform a C-section with a knife.
I agree, but also I think that like if you're in the post-apocalyptic world and like she tells you like you should do like you might kill the baby, but the baby's gonna die anyway. Like and so I like it. Like I get it, and maybe I'm like being so I'm like really dismissive of like the fact that she didn't try, but I really think she should have tried. And ultimately, I think it's just really important that Ellie just like does not try to do anything. She lets it happen.
Well, what I think is also incredibly interesting is that Ellie, as much as she sort of chastises Jesse for his own sort of moral code that he is operating under, as a very poignant phrase in the bookshop says, Grace, on the back wall, everything's got a moral if you can only find it. And for Ellie, and I think a lot of this is informed by the way that she kind of got thrown into the thralls of this post-apocalyptic situation when she was a kid. She's really all about children in many ways. One of the reasons why she bristles with Jesse in this episode when they happen to see like the Sarah fight getting interrogated and dragged away is like, he was just a kid. When she's being strung up by the Sarah fight, she turns to the little girl holding the dead possum and be like, come on, vouch for me. I'm not a wolf, right? Like, I think Ellie has such a fundamental belief in the innocence of childhood, this tabula rasa that you're born with that sort of gets written for you by nurture, by the elements that are around you, rather than what Gail has been espousing to Tommy in that very poignant scene about the nature of, no, you're sort of born with a bunch of stuff written on your tablet already. But I think in this moment as well, it is just this resounding symbol to Ellie about the fact that these kids are not innocent in that they are caught up in the crossfire too. Like, this kid, by and large, did not have a dog in the fight or a wolf in the fight of everything that is going on between Team Ellie and Team Abby. But just due to, again, much like sort of like Jesse and Amanda were speaking, being tangentially connected, umbilically connected in this case, to someone who was a part of this, they have to suffer. They have to die for it. I imagine at least part of Ellie's stupor in that moment where she is just reduced to tears as RHAP focuses on the pregnant belly of the deceased Mel is this idea that, like, no one is innocent in all of this. As
Yeah.
even the youngest ones, the ones you would think that you would most want to protect from harm, are inevitably going to be dragged into this because that's the world that you live in.
Yeah, I think it's like super incredibly morally complex. And that is what I think you're supposed to take away from it. Like, I'm saying I think Ellie should have done it, but that's not without acknowledgement of the fact that, like, you know, that would be what an incredibly effed up situation that would be, to not only, and that she might not be able to do it successfully,
Mm.
um and that she'd have to take care of it. Well, I didn't realize I would come on this podcast and be like, Mike, I'm pro-life.
Maybe that's the true cliffhanger shocker of the finale, Grace.
I am pretty pro-choice, so to each their own. But yeah, I think you're supposed to. I think you can sit there and be like, I would make the same choice as Ellie. That I would choose not to figure out how to birth the baby, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's like an incredibly like complicated thing to do, and yet I can sit there and be like, I think she should have done it. And I think, like, it's just I really like this moment, so I'm trying to really, I really don't like the gunshot through Owen that kills Mel. I think it's arguably very silly, but at the same time, I understand why they want to get to a moment that I think highlights the themes more than the way the video game does, which is like she kills Mel, and she kills somebody who's pregnant. Like, that's close. I really like this morality thing, that like this like the kind of the ugliness that we have to sit in with the fact that, like, she killed this woman, she chooses not to save the baby. It's pretty awful. So yeah, I'm like, wow, how fun.
Well, we have plenty of fun in store for us in season 3. No word yet, I believe, right, Grace, on when it is coming, though maybe
I don't think so.
as we get closer to the finale proper, or the days following, like, will get announced to us. I would not be surprised, considering it was a 2-year gap between seasons 1 and 2. Like, I don't believe they're in production for season 3 yet, so it might not be until 2027 that we get season 3. But in terms of what I'm expecting, and Grace, maybe you'll talk about this more with Taran from a canonical perspective, I do think we're going to be spending at least the first part of the season on the WLF side, on the Abby focus side, and I do not think Ellie's dead. I do not think Dina's dead. I do not think Tommy will be dead, because I think that it would kind of feel weird to kill off both Jesse and Tommy. It felt like Jesse, it made sense. We learned a lot about the character only to kill him off here. Tommy, I still want to see kind of his perspective on things. And I thought what was also very interesting was, it looked like Abby was about to kill Tommy because she assumed that he was the one to kill Mel and Owen, right? She says, he killed my friends. And I guess it makes sense from more of a bird's eye view, because you're like, oh yeah, this is the brother of the guy I killed. Yeah, it would make sense to do this. But Ellie tells her, no, I did. And maybe I'm just like manifesting this to happen, but I want to see more Ellie and Abby discourse, because again, the similarities there of killing the father figure and then sort of like either discounting or not even thinking about the fact that there is a generation that is left in the wake of this grief, of the loss of such a supportive figure, in the form of Abby here, where she decides to get revenge on behalf of her dad. And in Ellie here, I think it's a really interesting idea that Abby, who probably doesn't know, I mean, I guess they saw maybe Joel and Ellie together at a certain point, or maybe they found out about Joel and Ellie, that it was like, okay, I know who she is. Abby's surprise at the fact that Ellie was the one to do it, on the one hand, does make sense, again, given the narrative she drew for herself. On the other hand, it's like, again, you two are so similar. You should not be surprised that Ellie was the one to pull the trigger here.
Well, I think, and like, someone will correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but like, based on like Nora's reaction to Ellie, is this idea like, oh, we didn't realize you were the girl that was saved.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
a big piece of this, that like they don't realize that like the person that's lying on the ground screaming that, and like a little silly to be like, oh my god, I can't believe you came. It's like, I yelled I was gonna murder you when I was on the ground as you killed Joel. But yeah, I think a piece of it is like, I don't think they realize how connected that it's like, that Joel killed killed for Ellie, like that person
Mhm.
specifically. They don't know that that's Ellie. So yeah, Tara and I will talk more in the video game. It will be a video, the deep dive podcast. It will be kind of interesting with this, like the talk of there being 4 seasons, not the hotel,
Or the Netflix show
and the
that also
Netflix
has
show.
a surprising amount of death in it.
Yeah, that the video game, most people assumed seasons 2 and 3 would be the second video game split in half. Now people wonder whether there's actually like it will be split into thirds, or
Or we go
yeah,
full, like, latter half Game of Thrones, right? Where it's like, there is no
it,
more adaptable material, but hey, we do have one of the creators of the video game running the
yes.
show.
Yes, that is the big piece that I think is like, that will be like super interesting for Tara and I to chat about, is like the fact that Druckmann is involved. There's another show that just, oh, Presumed Innocent. That seems like a
Mm.
wild comp here, but that's based on a book, and the no, is it no, it's not Presumed Innocent. It's the one with Joel Edgerton on Apple TV. It's a sci-fi
Oh,
show where the writer wrote the first book, they adapted the first book, and then they clearly like left a cliffhanger, and then he's the writer of the show, and so that's super
Dark Matter,
interesting.
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter. It'd be super interesting to see, like, it's interesting idea of like the person who like hasn't yet, like there's that person who created the whole thing is going to like develop new material in this different format. So that's kind of interesting to follow, whether we think that Druckmann has ideas for a 4th season of the show, which like in some ways is the part 3 of the video game, or will never be another video game, but will be there. So I think they actually gave us a fair bit to like get to chew on at the
Well,
end here.
as we're chewing on that, let's talk about the 7-course meal we had, Grace. Let's talk about
Mm.
The Last of Us Season 2, because now it has come to its conclusion. What did you think about it overall? How did you think the course of Season 2 went, now that we know the entire picture from beginning to end?
Yeah, I was gonna say good, not great, but I'm actually gonna say great, not amazing. So like I'm gonna
Mm.
buff up my
Yeah,
things.
I would agree with that. I think I would say it is like one of these solid 7 or 8 out of 10 seasons. It's very tough considering that, in my opinion, season 1 was an absolute 10 out of 10 or 11 if I could give it, but it's a step down, but not a massive one.
Yeah, and I think that for me, it's been really hard to decipher sort of and like figure out. And I don't think I always did it perfectly, but hopefully I've gotten better at it. Which is like trying to keep in this podcast being like very like show focused, because
Mm.
I think actually it's interesting that this show aired at the same time as as this recent Survivor season, Mike, where I feel like there's a very similar thing happening where the internet is like really unhappy. And we should sometimes remind ourselves that the internet is not all of society, because I have had at Survivor, I had a friend reach out who was watching the finale just the other night, like after it had aired, and was like, loves Joe and Eva. It was like, they are
Mhm.
my favorite people ever. Like they like, and so they were like very excited, and then the ending of the season happens and they feel whatever the way they feel. And then I feel like in this, like my neighbor who's been watching The Last of Us, like messaged me after the episode and was always like, that was great. I love that. And he's like really enjoying the season. Like it's a very good, like quality show, but there is this like level of sentiment about this season that Tara and I have talked a lot about, that feels so different than the video game, and people are really like polarized by the show in a
Mm.
way that feels, I think, probably more outsized than it actually probably is. So it's been interesting. I do think like the quality of these episodes, especially episode 2 and episode 6, I thought were like, for me, and I think episode 6 is the standout of the season. But in some ways, um it did not hit the highs of season, like week to week. It didn't hit the same like week to week. I was like, this is amazing in season 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some comparisons, at least in our opinions, Grace, about like an Andor season 2 versus an
Yeah.
Andor season 1, where The Last of Us season 1 had this structure that was really, again, to use your operative term, fun, of like going from location to location, meeting new groups of characters, hearing all these stories of what life is like in the apocalypse. And season 2 eschewed that. Again, it was a much more straightforward narrative. We were in Jackson, we were in Seattle. That's pretty much it. And I think there were a lot of pros to it. You know, I absolutely loved Dina. I think Isabella Merced
Yeah.
is probably like one of the highlights of the season for me. I think they did a really great job of introducing her character, all of its complexities therein, telling her story. I felt for the relationship between her and Ellie. I think they did a really good job, despite the fact that we had to do a lot of catch up on the will they, won't they that was accumulating for the past 5 years. I think that the two of them were so good together that it truly felt like a genuine relationship that had the two of them caring about each other. I think maybe one of the cons is the fact that maybe some of the other characters did not necessarily get the same amount of love just due to their proximity in the storyline. You know, you speak about Jesse, who we find out a lot about in this last episode. All of the WLF members, essentially, including Abby, which I think is one of the larger nitpicks or complaints outright about the season, is the fact that Abby is missing from episode 2 until this final scene, allows us to not necessarily care about anything that's going on, honestly, in Seattle. As interesting as Isaac is as a character, there are these pieces of information that we get dropped in terms of lore that's like, yeah, this is interesting, but I want to know how it affects our main characters. But that does not take away from the fact that I thought episodes 2 and 6 were sensational, right up there with some of the best stuff that season 1 had to offer. And I feel like a lot of the stuff around it was like very, very good as well. I think especially getting the opportunity to come in here and talk things through, that even episodes that feel like more quote unquote filler, like episode 3, or okay, we're spending another day in Seattle type of stuff. There were these individual moments in terms of relationships and actions taken that resound back to a lot of these thematics that you and I have been talking about since the very beginning that feel so inherently tied to The Last of Us. You know, I am not going to take down the show for having to pivot their format in a way to, you know, set it around a certain type of narrative. Like this was not going to be the sort of travelogue show that it was in season 1. And I think once I started realizing that and started getting on board, saddling up in a manner of speaking with what they were trying to do, the more I appreciated it. I don't think it is a perfect season. And again, I still feel like this is essentially the first half of a supersized season 2. And what I will say is, so far, so good. You know, I think this finale definitely surprised me with a lot of blood that was let. And the ending at least intrigues me to see the rewind sequence again to where things were in Seattle so that we could hopefully get to know Abby a bit more. Would not be surprised if Caitlin Dever is jumped up to a main cast member now, especially maybe replacing young Mazzino and Pedro Pascal. And so no matter when it comes, Grace, I always relish the time to not only spend in this world with these incredibly complicated characters, but getting to spend that time with you every week here on the recap.
Yeah, same. I think the themes of the show, like I think I came on multiple times, was like, wow, the show just like really understands character and theme and
Yep.
story. And I think that like for me, that's still certainly there. And I think it is hard to judge this season because it does feel like there's another season to come before you can like kind of appreciate everything that this season was trying to do. Like in some ways, yeah, like both seasons have sort of a straightforward narrative and they're very like tropey. And I think in some ways, probably season 1 is just more successful at like feeling like a fresh take on it. It feels cleaner, I think. Whereas in
Mm,
season 2, you kind of think you know where the story is going. By episode 2, you've lost Joel, and then you're sort of like reshifting and reframing what the story is about. Okay, now it's going to be about revenge. By the end of the season, sorry, then you're like, oh, now we're going to like jump back and redo all of like some of this with like new context. That just feels a little messier that I feel like it's hard to appreciate without another season under its belt. I totally agree with what you said about Isabella Merced as Dina. I think that probably she has to be, you know, probably in contention for a supporting actress nod so
yeah.
far. I was trying to like sort of pull up
What?
who are the front runners are.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think Pedro Pascal's going to get supporting instead of lead?
No, I think you'd have to still. I mean, he's still. I know he's like only in
He's
like
in half the season.
he's in three of of seven.
7.
I think you still put him in the league. He's so important to those. The first episode, the second episode,
Mhm.
and the sixth. I think you still keep him as lead. I am like kind of looking at. I was like, oh, I think this is so easy, and then I looked at the like people who are in contention for supporting actress, and it's actually between White Lotus people,
Yeah.
Severance people, and the Pit people. It's not a lot of room. Not a lot of room. That's not even including some Andor, some Yellow Jackets people. It will be very competitive. But Variety, I really like Variety's like tracker on,
Yeah.
and they have Isabella Merced at number 5 at the moment, behind
Alright.
Carrie Coon, Allison Janney, Parker Posey, and Patricia Arquette. So unfortunately, they bumped all of the Pit people down. So
Yeah. Well, because
yeah.
I believe there was also, not to get too pity here, but I believe there was some news that I think maybe they're mainly pushing for like a Noah Wiley nomination above any other specific cast members.
Come on, Taylor Dearden. Come on, supporting actress nod. Come
Well,
on,
we got
you
to
gotta
see
have it.
Dr. Mel in a very different
That's true.
regard here.
Yeah.
Well, again, Grace, at this moment, we do not know when the next time we'll be talking The Last of Us is. I know that you'll be talking The Last of Us, in the next 48 hours with Taran in your final edition of the deep dive. But in the meantime, during our, interminable off season, what are you doing podcast wise?
We'll have the tastemakers each week. It's very enjoyable. Tara and I chatting about whatever is new out that week. We give our recommendations as to whether it's worth watching or you can skip it. And yeah, we'll have other recaps probably every once in a while show up here on RHAP. We know some TV. It is almost June, which means on RHAP special The Pride Has Spoken coverage should be
Yeah.
returning in the not so distant future. And yeah, I'm writing on Parade alongside you, Mike. And yeah, got lots of other stuff going on. I did a special Andor coverage with Ariel from Crying Laughing podcast as
Ooh.
well. I think Amanda and I are going to try to chat some The Rehearsal and Everybody's Live in LA and just do a little bit of a comedy get together. So yeah, lots of stuff happening.
Perfect. Got lots of stuff in the tank as well, not aquarium wise. Of course, as Grace mentioned, the Survivor finale recently wrapped. Talk about, complicated father figures, and how they may or may not pay for their actions down the line. But of course, I had the chance to talk with everyone from the final 5. I'm doing the B&B. Believe it or not, that we'll have a whole other gaggle of returning Survivor players to talk about very soon. So I'll do a podcast about that. Survivor celebrating its 25th anniversary. I'm doing an entire series about that where you can vote on the greatest 25 moments in Survivor history, and I'll be revealing that throughout the month of June. Also in June, Josh Wigler and I will officially make our return to Down the Hatch to cover the 4th and final season of Battlestar Galactica. Got Big Brother going on, the reality flash happening. There's a lot going on until The Last of Us is back in our eyes. And once that happens, Grace and I will be back in your ears, assumingly, covering everything to do with season 3. So let us know your thoughts. What did you think about the finale, about a lot of the big deaths, about the way things ended? What are you looking forward to in season 3? What were your thoughts on season 2 overall? Let your voice be known in the comments on social media. We've been so grateful to everyone that has followed us along all season. I know that there's a lot of different Last of Us podcasts out there. They're popping up every day like fungi. And so those of you that have chosen to pick our particular breed of mushroom are greatly, greatly appreciated. And check out everything else going on at WeKnowScriptedTV.com. That's going to do it for this finale recap of The Last of Us Season 2. I hope those of us who are celebrating Memorial Day have a great Monday, and let us remember not only those that we lost over the course of this show, but looking back upon the past 7 weeks of Season 2 and the coverage therein, because we don't know when more is going to be on the horizon. But until that day comes, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.